From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Wow. You just stand here and the audience gets silent. Good morning, everybody. We are happy to invite you to another, or to welcome you, not invite, to another of the series of LC's Digital Future and You that are coordinated by Judith Cannon and Angela Kinney, two of the Acquisition and Bibliographic Access Division Chiefs. This morning, it just so happens that I am one of the presenters, if you will, along with my colleague Sally McCallum. And we wanted to offer for LC staff what we've been doing externally and most recently at the ALA annual conference, midwinter meeting in Dallas. And that is to talk about the Bibliographic Framework Initiative. I caution you that we have variously referred to this initiative exercise, and for someone who is grounded in cataloging, that causes me some concern. We call it the Bibliographic Framework Initiative. We call it the Bibliographic Framework Transition Initiative. We've called it the New Bibliographic Framework, and some are even referring to it as BFI. Rest assured, it's all about the same topic initiative that we'll be covering this morning. That is, what does it take to move our community or to evolve from the current MARC format to something else? And we're not even sure what that something else is. Sally, of course, will get into more of the nitty-gritty and at least talk about the existing standards and what we need to do to make sure that we evolve in a way that we can manage the process. What I'll do is give an update on the planning thus far, what we envision, what we've done, and what we expect to happen. You'll hear the word expect quite a bit because we are still framing this as we move forward, and we want to do it right because as any of you know who've dealt with MARC, this is a major step for us. As a recent speaker for this program, the series of programs said, how many communities have a standard, a format, a structure that has lasted as long as MARC has. And as one, Sally and I both, who work with the creator of MARC, Henriette Avram, we have some reverence for what we have and what we hope to move to. There has been discussion about replacing the MARC format for a number of years now. It's come up in general discussions. I hear it at just about every professional meeting I go to. It was a major recommendation, that is to replace MARC, by the LC Working Group on the Future of Bibliographic Control that our former associate librarian, Deanna Markham, set up in 2006. With the RDA test that the three U.S. national libraries conducted in the final quarter of 2010, the outcome of that test was, if we had a different format, the potential for RDA would be so much greater. We can see the limitations of MARC. So it came out of that major activity as well. Deanna Markham decided then last spring, which would have been the spring of 2011, to actually tackle this particular issue. And to do that, she established a group of internal folk to work with her in moving this forward. In the handout that we provided you, you see the listing of all the members of the group: Sally McCallum, obviously, Ann Della Porta, Kevin Ford, Susan Morris, Dave Reeser, Ruth Scoville, and I constitute the group working with Dr. Marker. You'll see the affiliations and what each of us brings to that group as Deanna set it up last spring. I won't go into that. The group drafted a general statement by May of last year, and that statement was vetted and shared with the broader community. In particular, we wanted to have that statement ready by the ALA annual meeting that was held in New Orleans, and we met that deadline, and there was discussion about it and some fine-tuning. Following ALA then, the group drafted and issued by October of 2011 a general plan on the bibliographic framework, what we thought would be entailed, what it would take to move that particular initiative forward. Now, contemporaneous with the October 11th issuance of the plan, LC also, Library Services in particular, issued another document. And what we were trying to do and what Deanna Markham was trying to do is to view this as a holistic approach, and there were a number of activities that related to the bibliographic framework in which we work now, as well as the one that we were aiming for in the future. So one of the statements that came out last October was planning for the future distribution of bibliographic cataloging data and products. And this was under the guise of the Partnership and Outreach Directorate, and in particular the Business Enterprises operation run by Eugene Flanagan. And what that is looking for or towards is what will the future distribution of our bibliographic data look like with all the changes that are taking place, the change in the semantic web and the web community. What is it that we should be focusing on? And obviously, since many of the services that BE handles are the MARC distribution services, if we do something different with MARC, that becomes a key element. At the same time, plans continue to pace with the plans for implementing the RDA, that is Resource Description and Access, the new descriptive cataloging set of instructions that the community plans to adopt not before March 31st, 2013. In fact, the Library of Congress has issued a statement that it will target that date, March 31st, 2013, as the implementation date of RDA. So, and one of the conditions for implementing RDA is that we have made sufficient progress on moving towards a format, a structure, an environment, if you will, that is beyond MARC. So all of these things are intertwined and connected, and we're trying to make sure that we don't take one giant step in one direction without being mindful of the impact it will have across the bibliographic framework tableau, if you will. Now we have, Sally McCallum and her shop, NetDev, Network Development and MARC Standards Office, has created a website, and we've cited that website on the handout. That is a URL that you should follow, because that's where we will mount all the documentation, all the announcements, all the plans, all the changes as we proceed. That should be on the front side, if you can tell front from back, of the handout that you have. And so we want not only you, but we want the external communities to be aware of what we're doing, and we made that promise that we keep this as transparent as we could, as we try to do with RDA and with the LC Working Group. Now, with millions, and indeed some would say billions of MARC records and data encoded with MARC, there is a legacy that we have to be mindful of in terms of whatever we end up with, that there is an easy and a logical mapping to the existing data. We have to be able to maintain and to manage what we have, as well as move into the new environment. Sally will talk in greater detail about what that means and how that might be accomplished when she follows me. Now, we are committed, though, to having a broad array of participants in this process. We want to have key players from the semantic web community, from the vendor community, and that vendor community encompasses all vendors that have something to do with bibliographic data and the management dissemination thereof. We want people from the technology community, those kinds of experts that can give us that technology underpinning and background. And of course, we want the library community engaged in this process. Now, we expect that there will be at least 2 groups that we will establish to help make this happen. We have talked about an advisory group and then a technical group. And with technical group, I always put an S in parentheses because there may be several technical groups that may be doing component work that we test to see if this particular path seems viable, and so we may have 2 or 3 going on in tandem. For the advisory group, we view this as a higher level group where we have the key senior managers from important institutions. Those institutions could be other national libraries, our other national MARC partners, the British Library, Library and Archives Canada, National Library of Australia, Deutsche National Bibliothek, just to give you a sense of what they might be. Obviously OCLC, key players from professional associations. So we would have senior level managers who worry about any kind of implementation and what the cost of that is to be for the operations, working with us from that level. Then the other key component group or groups would be the technical, and these would be the experts that understand the technical needs associated with controlling, disseminating, producing, and particularly making information and data machine actionable. So we need to have those groups set up. Deanna Markham has agreed, since she started this process, to continue to assist us, and she's agreed to chair the advisory group if we get that, once we get that set up. We expect to convene these 2 groups at least once between now and the end of the fiscal year. We also expect to model what we did with the LC working group on the future of bibliographic control. That is to hopefully have some open sessions where we can invite people to come hear the progress and get feedback to pull into the deliberations and the directions that we want to take. We are sure we'll have that kind of open meeting this fiscal year, but that is on the horizon and part of our plans. Our new associate librarian for library services, Roberta Schaefer, I don't see her face, but I think she's present or she intends to be before the session is over, is firmly committed to this initiative. She realizes that it is a prime concern of hers as the new associate librarian and for library services, who has responsibility for this aspect of the library's work. That at a high level gives you the background where we think we are in moving this process forward. We definitely want to have something strong to be able to report out by ALA annual meeting in June in Anaheim. And so we'll be working feverishly between now and then to make that happen with our internal group and along with Roberta Schaefer. I think we'll accept questions after Sally has talked, and then we can entertain your questions, concerns, and feedback at the end of that. So with that, I will yield to my colleague, Sally McCallum, Chief of the Network Standards and MARC Development Office. I think I flipped that around. It's
okay. Okay. I'm glad to be able to talk to you a little bit more detail about where we're going with this. Let me say, in talking about the requirements, one thing we're well aware of is that there's a huge MARC infrastructure. It's extensive. All of our library catalogs are record suppliers, of which, of course, OCLC is the top of it, but there are many other kinds of record suppliers in the environment. And our systems are all built around the current MARC format. Now, MARC has adapted itself as new technologies have come along. We have MARC XML and we have various derivatives, but it's only been able to adapt to a certain point. And now with the really changing technologies and into the semantic area and our changing resource description with RDA, it was the time to try to make a more extensive change, one that will set up, we hope, the environment for the next 20 years. I don't know. The last segment's been 40 years, but I'm not sure that that's the way it works these days. It may be the next segment will be 20 years. We convened a group of experts, national, technical, institutional, digital, very small group to help us formulate our basic requirements, not any sort of details, but people who really were working in the semantic community, extensive experience with digital material, broad understanding of the whole environment. And this is what we came out with, the requirements that you have on the handout that I hope you picked up. One is that we have to have a broad accommodation of content rules and data models. In other words, the new environment's got to be as rule agnostic as possible. That doesn't mean RDA won't have a prominent role, just as with MARC, which is somewhat rule agnostic and is used by some of these other communities, communities with other rules. It's still very much AACR oriented to a large extent. So there are other rules, though. There's AACR in addition to RDA, and we will have AACR data both to accommodate and coming in still for a foreseeable future. There's DAX, the Describing Archives Content Standard that many archivists use, VRA Core, which is used by visual resources catalogers, and CCO, Cataloging Cultural Objects, which is used in the cultural object community. It's getting a little bit further away from just our kind of cataloging. And so our desire is to be able to accommodate all those along with RDA. The next one is that the next requirement is provision for data that accompanies or supports bibliographic data. As the MARC format has developed, it's been sort of a single thing that we all exchanged. And so if we needed a little bit of preservation data, we put it in there. And let me say, that wasn't done lightly. We always thought about whether that really should be going into the MARC format, which is for describing objects and not necessarily for preservation data. But we did. We put that in. We've got little bits of technical metadata. We've got bits of rights metadata in our MARC format because that was the thing that was exchanged. And we have coded data, which machines love. And all these things, they support the bibliographic data. All these things need to be looked at to see if there is a more modular approach we should be taking, that there's bibliographic data and it has links to the preservation data, links to more technical data, links to more detailed rights data, which rights are, as you all know, are becoming more and more prominent and talked about, and links to coded data for that matter. We need to accommodate textual data and linked data with URIs or URLs, as you may visualize them, and both. The linked data, the semantic web linked data community is very fond of using, instead of putting text and giving an author's name, instead putting a URI that links to more, not only the author's name, but more information about the author. That's the whole idea of linked data, is that enables a machine to in fact go there and then from there go someplace else and bring you back more information. However, many of our systems are not going to be able to take a record that is full of URIs and screen something for the end user. There are various ways around that. One is to put both the textual data and the link. And that we need to work out how that's going to work. It could be that the records that people get from LC, if there are such things as records, you can have a choice of both, or one or the other, or you can have a mixture. But we know that we do still have the end user as the final arbiter serving the end user. End users, when they do a search, want to see all the records instantaneously, and it's got to be something that functions so that the record, the content they want to see, comes to them very quickly. We need to consider, there will be a consideration of separation, what I call separation of concerns, with respect to the communications format, the record input interface, and system internal storage, and really the end user discovery interface, or end user record interface. The MARC format was designed to be a communications format. It was going to be for the communication among agencies of the bibliographic data. But as things developed, as the way things developed, in fact, it became very fuzzy, and it became a storage format for some systems and almost a storage format for other systems. Systems found that they could manipulate the data better if it was close to MARC, if it was parsed the same as MARC. So it became something, it became integrated into the storage systems. It's also the case, as you know, on your cataloging interface, you can see the MARC version, not the end user interface, I'm sorry, the end user interface, you can ask to see the MARC version of it. So we make it so that even the end user can see MARC. And we also, and the catalogers, of course, the cataloging input screens are very closely tied to the MARC formats and the marking we have in those formats. You know, it's interesting to note that I imagine there are very few of you in the room that can remember the time when we didn't use the tags that we use today in our cataloger interface, the 245, the 100. But for many, many years, we had a mnemonic that we used, and I don't remember what they are. Title was probably, 245 is probably TIL. And we were different from the rest of the library community, which learned those tags. And I expect to see in the future these different concerns to be further apart and less like this communications vehicle that we hope that we're going to develop in the next few years. And that may work well, it may not work so well. We don't know. That's something that we're going to be experimenting with. But it could make your job a lot easier, because it could be that you will have an interface where you don't have to learn these tags and you don't have to learn these numbers. On the other hand, you know them, and I know that doesn't mean much today. We need to be able to serve all sizes of libraries. The MARC environment had this pretty much sorted out, I believe. You could make simple records, you could make complex records. The MARC format probably has 500 data elements in it, but you could make a record with 10, and you only need to know 15 in order to do your whole processing. So it was the case that everyone had adjusted themselves over time to the size of the format that they needed for what they were doing. Mind you, those people who made records with just very few data elements may not have made records that you could use in our Library of Congress cataloging, but they were still, they could be used within the environment. We had simple systems. There were very simple PC-based systems that some of the vendors still distribute to libraries, small libraries. And then there are multifunctional systems, ILSs, like we have it here and like many libraries have. And as I say, most of those things had been sort of figured out and sorted out. But the new framework must support both the small and the large. We're not going to make something that is so complex. We can't make something that is so complex that the small libraries then are left to try to figure out something on their own, or to think of something, to go off and do something non-standard that separates them from being able to do copy cataloging. Copy cataloging, after all, we don't say it much anymore, but it is the lifeblood of many libraries. One time I was taking a bus from ALA to the airport, and there was someone from a fairly large, well, a smaller, but not tiny, university in the Midwest, who was taking the bus with me, sitting with me, and he said that they do copy cataloging using PromptCat, I think, at OCLC for 95% of their cataloging. And that was so important to him. That meant the money he had and his that he was given by the university could be used to buy resources, and less of it to buy cataloging people to do cataloging. Mind you, he still had to have some catalogers for the 5%, and to check what was going on with respect to the 95%, but he didn't need as many. Now let me turn to, we will continue to maintain MARC. We realistically realize this colossal environment is not going to change overnight. We're not going to have it even worked out overnight. And so we will be maintaining MARC. Libraries will be changing gradually, we think, as products emerge that help them, as their finances allow them. They may want to buy a new product with a new framework-based system, but they may not be able to until they have the money to do that. So that's one reason we have worked the last several years to adapt MARC for RDA. And in doing that, we've added a lot of things to MARC and juggled a lot of things around, and in some ways we're adding redundancies. We're spoiling what we had honed down with respect to MARC, but we need to be able to sustain the RDA environment until, in fact, people have changed. And so we will be maintaining it. We expect most of the changes to not come from just things that people want that are not related to RDA implementation, but a few will. We had something at the last MARBI meeting that I think it was the music catalogers. They always have very interesting ideas on things that will help them make their information easier to find. And they brought something that had nothing to do with RDA, but had everything to do with making things better in their community. But we think the non-RDA changes will be minimal with respect to MARC. We recognize that there are millions of MARC-based metadata records out there, and we've got to have compatibility with those records. We can't do something that is very difficult to walk back and forth, that sort of leaves all that behind. I know when MARC was first started, we were going from a card catalog where all the records were to automated catalog where there weren't very many. And I can remember Lucia Rather always saying, well, the future is longer than the past. And it's true, but we've got billions of those MARC records out there, and we want to be able to see that information. So we aren't going to just abandon them. We can't leave them behind. And we didn't do that with the card catalog. It maybe took us 20 years to finally get that card catalog into machine-readable form, but we did do it. And mind you, redescribing those resources is not feasible. And finally, we need to be able to provide for transformations from MARC to the new environment. So we're going to be having to develop software that allows you to walk back and forth, that if you get records from somebody that's still in a MARC environment, you can still use those records because you can transform them into what you need in your new environment, because you're in the new environment, or vice versa. Library of Congress needs to be able to put out records in its new environment a new framework. It also needs to be able to put out records in MARC for those people who are still using the MARC environment. This will enable evolution. This enables everyone to evolve at their own pace. So we have a lot. We want to adapt to the new technologies. In summary, we want to maintain flexibility for all types of libraries, and we want to enable evolution from MARC. And that's going to be a tall order. But we're ready for that challenge. As I think Beecher said, we've all talked about evolving from MARC for a long time, but it was so big we actually couldn't couldn't get it started. I can remember, 8 years ago, convening a meeting here of some various people to talk about evolution from MARC, and then we just didn't go any place with that because we weren't, well, one, the new cataloging rules weren't ready, and we always felt like in some ways we needed to hitch those two together to have evolved MARC prior to RDA, and that kind of change might have left us not talking to each other again. So what is the approach we're going to use? We're going to focus on the web environment. And what you see coming along is the linked data principles and mechanisms that are being touted. I saw a news article recently from Google. They're looking to do their next generation of search and include some semantic components. They've been working on this for a couple of years. So everyone is looking to the semantic web linked data philosophy or ideas to see how they might be incorporated. Let me say that the semantic web ideas are 15 years old, the beginning of them. It's not something new, but they're colossal in changing the behavior changes that are needed. And that's why it's taken a long time to develop some of the pathways, or to experiment with some of the pathways. You know, in the mid-90s, we decided we needed to move MARC, and so we did what was then the popular format was SGML. Frankly, I can't even remember exactly what that stood for at this point because it's so long ago. Now, SGML rose very high. It was very important. We actually did a MARC SGML, and then someone said, this is all too complex. It needs to be refined, and XML was born. Now, XML is still with us, and we, in fact, took what we did and converted to MARC XML. And did a MARC in the XML environment, which was, we learned a lot from what we did with SGML. We had something really that we could really use in the XML environment. So that's sort of what is happening in the semantic area, that the early on they have all sorts of grand ideas, and they're applying old ways of old tools to those ideas, and then with time, as they understand the ideas better, they develop new tools, new formats, new ways of viewing the data, and they come out with something more reasonable. I think that it's a good time for us to be looking at trying to apply some of the semantic rules and linked data rules to our data, because things might be becoming mature enough that it's not going to change out from under you, like SGML did. So in the current model in the linked data environment is what's called the Resource Description Framework. It's RDF. It can be written out. It's a model, and it can be written out in numerous syntaxes, one of which is XML. And that one's easier to read. I think most of you have seen a little XML. And then there are other syntaxes that it can be written in that some programmers prefer or some systems prefer. The XML, as I say, we use it for MARC XML, and MODs and MADs are all both XML, and there are many XML formats out there today, and it's really very widely used. RDF can also be used with different databases, different database types. Relational, which is what we have Voyager on now. Now, some people complain in the RDF and semantic web community that relational databases shred the data, and that's how they handle the data, and don't focus enough on the relationships. But it can be used as an underpinning. Native XML database is another one, and that is what we've been doing, experimenting with in my office. And the National Library Catalog beta version is, in fact, a native XML database underlies that, not a relational database. And then there are triple stores, and that's what we use. We attach actually a triple store to the native XML database to do the id.loc.gov, the vocabularies service that you may or may not have seen, and that's another option one might have. So we're going to have more options for storage and retrieval in the future, we think, if we can move when we move to a new environment. Now, RDF is being, the Resource Description Framework, RDF, is being used in a variety of applications, but I must say, if you look at them, many of them are somewhat closed environments. One of the ones that they always hold up as a really successful one has been the BBC in England, and they have done really interesting and dramatic things with using RDF. We are going to see if we can apply it to a less controlled environment and be equally successful. So we'll see. That's what we're trying to approach. One of the first things we need to do is to model our community interactions. We need to look at our current community interactions, and we need to look at the desired ones, or ones we think a linked data environment or a semantic web environment could support, so that we're thinking beyond what we have right now. We need to develop a, quote, format. Now, we don't use the word format, and we don't use the word record quite often in the linked data environment, the semantic web, but I think that's a little bit of an affectation. In fact, there floats that concept. It's just that we're not supposed to use the words. And so we call it an ontology. And so in RDF, we will be doing an ontology for as a data model for our RDF application. We need to organize some prototyping and reference applications, because we've got to immediately. It's one thing to do it in sort of the theoretical way. It's another thing then to see if these things really can interact and can interact efficiently. And with all this, as Beecher said in his closing remarks, I think, is that we're going to collaborate. And we're going to, with our MARC partners, we have some official MARC partners. Actually, the British Library, the National Library of Canada, and the Deutsche Bibliothek have signed agreements with us with respect to MARC that were signed by our upper level management. We're going to be working with our other national libraries, who we always collaborate with closely. We're going to be working with the infrastructure suppliers, because we're not going to be successful if we leave those suppliers behind, because we've abandoned the libraries that use those suppliers if we do that. And we're going to be working with the library community. So there will be a lot of collaboration. That's all I had. And Beecher and I are now ready for questions. Beecher, you want to come up here? We can share the mic.
Sure.
Assuming there will be
Other
some.
questions?
So, as a former cataloger, I'm trying to see this from the practical side of things, what the cataloging record will look like in the future, and you may not be able to say that now, but will it be in XML? Will it be an extension of MARC? What will it look like? What do you envision that it will look like?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think you will see a user interface more so that right now you see that MARC record as your user interface. If you, in the future, it could be XML in one establishment, it could be anything. It will probably be some sort of list of elements or something like that, because I think we expect that there'll be more separation of the ontology or the format from the user interface. So you're thinking in terms of the communications record. I see it and I input it, and it looks like the communications record. You're going to have the communications record, and I'm going to have my input record, my establishment needs to visualize it.
So it may be that we're continuing to create a MARC record, but that's communicated in a different format.
Well, it could be. I don't know. I doubt that, but it could be. Yes, I mean, because you can do it any way you want. I mean, you can, and when you say, will it be XML? You're not going to have XML tags and things like that on your screens. You're just going to have labels probably, or who knows. It may be that the catalogers will be able to determine their own interface, how they want it set up, how they want to be able to see it eventually.
And the fact that you keep saying a MARC record, keep in mind that's what we're talking about, evolving from MARC. So you shouldn't even be thinking in terms of a MARC record. Think about what you're doing with RDA. I mean, RDA is resource description and access, not RDF, resource description framework. The new cataloging instructions, they are instructing you to create data for particular data elements, not so much worried about what the record would look like and what is the title entry and whatnot. It talks about each of those elements, and those elements can be plugged into anything. And so if you create those, presumably down the road, machines, humans will be able to pull those data elements and construct whatever you want. So if you create, that's why we talk about in terms of the work, the expression, the manifestation. If you get all of those elements there, you can pull those together to construct whatever you want. It may look like a record just for managing the process and for you understanding what you have there before you. But in terms of storage, these elements exist and they can be pulled together in any way you want. So, and we can't say what the record is, except it's not going to be marked. So you won't be describing a marked record. You might say, what is the structure going to look like that catalogers work with? That might be a realistic question to ask, but we can't give you a realistic answer because we don't know what that environment is. But so if you understand the pieces, that begins to tell you what it might look like. It also explains the complexity of moving from where we are to something else and why we started 8 years ago and decided it wasn't worth it, but now with a new set of instructions for the content code, then it's easier to begin seeing how it can be envisioned or visualized. Some of you attended the session that Deborah Fritz gave a couple of weeks ago, for instance. She's beginning to think about how using RDA and using MARC that currently exists to begin visualizing how these things are mapped or come together. So that may be the closest you begin to see how the structure or the complexity of the structure might look. And she's continuing to fine tune that and hope to present that at ALA Annual for those who attend that. And for those who don't, to be able to mount that so people begin to follow up and get a sense of it. Because it's hard unless you can visualize what it is you're talking about. And that is our drawback. We expect to see something concrete and we can't tell you what that concrete visualization looks like just yet.
So I assume sometime in FY13 that you'll be pulling in those who actually do the cataloging to help with the visualization of the final product? Because I'm thinking in terms of what kind of training will be necessary for my staff to be able to make this.
I can fairly certainly say none for your staff this year or next year. I think whatever we come up with will simply be prototypes and they may be small pilots, but there's not going to be wholesale training and rescaling what we do because it won't be ready.
No, that's why we're working on MARC and RDA. This is what we'll be exploring.
As we said, there may be several pilots going on. And at some point, we then may decide, okay, we want to take one division and explore this avenue, take another division and explore that avenue. But there won't be wholesale. The wholesale training and redirection that staff would have to undergo will just be RDA for the next year or two. I can fairly certainly say that because there won't be anything else, no matter what we do, how much money we get. There's a question. Is that Artie?
Yeah. Given how much importance there's going to be on identifiers related to linked data, do you see this effort having any coordination or relationship with bodies that
Well, we've always been involved somewhat with identifier standards and development of them. We don't know how much we would be involved in the future. You know, there's one thing with respect to some of those identifiers is that they are idealistically, they would be great, but it's going to take an enormous amount of work to do it, and whose budget's going to support that work? And so the Library of Congress has had a path that we do a lot of things. We do our name authorities, and we do things that would feed into identifiers, but we don't do more than we need for our own, what we're doing. And so I don't particularly see us taking on sort of the world of all of the identifiers for names or something like that, but we will continue to be a contributor, which I think we are now.
Yeah, those elements of working with those communities is still important. I mean, the whole BIA, Virtual International Authority, all of those, and ISNI begins to look at the identifier. So there is a role. I'm fairly certain it won't be critical to what we do in the next year or two. Tom and then Judy.
I'm probably out of my depth here, but in automated semantic web linkages bring about standardization of search terms, either names or particularly subjects, which I'm concerned about, across 500 languages simultaneously. My concern is that moving to a web environment does not allow for the maintenance of authority records. And that's kind of being slipped in under the table. Cross-references.
Well, I'm sorry, web-based environment, not that everything's going to be in HTML on the web or something like that. You know, it's going to have a semantic foundation. No, I don't know if you've looked at the ID service, but we exploit those cross-references, the variants, the related headings. We have actually provided many linkages between the vocabularies that we have in the ID service, vocabulary and authorities and vocabulary service. It's id.loc.gov if you.
And that's being brought about by catalogers, not by semantic web linkages.
No, it's being the information, the content is created by catalogers and others. The vehicle for linking and tying those things together is what the semantic web people do. They don't claim they can do a name authority file. They just claim they can give you a way to write out that, record those name authorities and their relationships that will be strong and will enable linkages within the environment. But you're absolutely right that no, they are not. If we turn it over to them to do all the names, our name authority file, we won't get much.
And we will continue our role from the cataloging side to assure that we do that piece and that fits in or flows to what happens in terms of modeling the semantic web. So we don't expect to give up that responsibility anytime soon. Because I mean, that to me is one of the key elements that librarians provide, in particular catalogs, that authority control piece. And the rest of the world is beginning ever so slowly to pick up on that.
And you know, it is the case, it's appreciated out there. Even Google appreciates our name authority file and our subject authority file.
They may not tell us enough, but they do. Judy, I believe.
Yes, I want to make an observation and then make a suggestion. I'm not saying that anything, what I'm about to say has got nothing to do with what you said, but the fact is that a lot of people are dependent on the information found on the website. And because of the way we talk and everything, a lot of people are thinking this is just a transition from MARC, that you're doing a mapping to get away from MARC, to use it for RDA. And it isn't, it's really agnostic, it's much bigger than MARC. And I don't think this is always coming across to people. I'm not saying it's your fault. I think people read what they want to read, and they want to see those that understand RDA and are are using it now are very anxious to have something at their disposal that doesn't limit them, as MARC does, to using and applying RDA and all its possibilities. My suggestion is, and even in the even in the URL, you've got the word MARC, and I understand that, and I understand why it's there, but I think that people are not getting the agnostic component of this nearly clearly enough. And I thought you might put out a monthly bulletin on the website. I don't know whether you'd be able to do this, and possibly even the things that you're trying out, because some of it's being tried out in your division, Sally. And I think people that are in the know would be very interested in what you're doing, because I found this very enlightening.
You know, there isn't that much that has been going on with respect to the initiative directly, but there's going to be, and it's going to be at a much more rapid pace in the next 6 months. So the potential for putting out a bulletin or saying what we're doing is real. It wasn't real before, actually. Now, the other comment, you say we should not, just like we're not supposed to use the word record, it's old-fashioned, we use ontology. You say don't use MARC, use new word.
No, I'm not
okay, we'll find one eventually.
I'm not saying don't use MARC, but I think that you need to bring out more clearly that what you're looking for is agnostic, that it's much bigger than just MARC. It's not, you're not simply doing a mapping from MARC to something else. That's
why we call it the initiative framework, bibliographic framework initiative. And we avoid in the main document that's on the website, we avoid saying record and certain things that we always call it in a new environment, not a new record format. That's what we try to do. That's probably missed. Yes. But we have actually made a very concerted effort not to say we're going to do a new record format.
I know you've done that, but I know also from comments at ALA Midwinter that it is being missed.
And I don't know how to get around that, Judy, except to continue to do these kinds of sessions, because we've said it fairly clearly. We try to make it clear that we're moving to a new environment, and we explicitly say we're not calling it anything because we don't know what to call it yet. And I know that lingers with MARC because that's what we know. Angela based her question on, well, what kind of MARC record? It won't be a MARC record. And I don't know how to do it except to continue to reinforce that. And as I said, the whole reason for that website is to post something when we have something to post. We haven't had anything to post yet.
Well, I think this presentation today will go a long way. We'll be putting it out there on the web. You can link to it from your page, or we can even load it on your page if you want. But I think this will help a great deal.
Well, we've been asked to do a webinar.
Yes.
We've danced around that, so we may have to do that too. And again, I really think that's the only way to do it, just continue to talk about it, and even among ourselves to get a bit more comfortable in what it might look like. And once we've had the benefit of some consultancy work and bringing the groups together, it will gel a bit more than it has now.
And once you also have a prototype in place, I think when people actually see something, that it really makes the impression and they understand from, I'm a visual person.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that's why we've been trying to get some work done so that we had something on the table that people could look at. They can say they don't like it. They can say they do like it. The end product, in the end, it may be totally different from what's on the table. But at least everyone's talking about the same thing rather than everyone talking off in different directions.
Regina and then Randy. There's a hand, and Bob. So Regina, Randy, Bob.
A question just for Sally. Sally, how likely do you think it will be that there will be multiple replacements in terms of ontologies or formats or whatever? That there may be many ways to express the bibliographic description, but that they will be dependent upon a system's input structure, like the template we saw from Deborah Fritz or others, and also dependent on a system's display structure. And that really what happens in between, kind of behind the hood, is up to choice of how that data is represented in any particular system. That we don't have to have a format replacement.
Well, as I said, we're going to focus on the communications format. That's the key place that things have got to come together. And freeing up, like you just described, freeing up the user interface, the cataloger interface, the inputter interface, is those things may differ more. Maybe they won't. You know, we're so used to, we're strong on standards in the library community, and we're used to having them, and we know the value of being able to switch from one system to another and not retrain everyone to a new user interface very much. That we, you know, I don't know where the community will go with that. It could be one user interface will take over, but if you're in RDA, it may be a different user interface if you use DAX as your cataloging code, or if you use CCO, but you're going to meet at the communications. That's our ideal. That's what we're striving for.
To exchange data, to output data that somebody else
Yes.
can input,
Yes.
you may need to have something more standard.
Yeah.
Let's see. What did I say? Randy and then Bob.
My question relates to the business side. You just touched upon the answer, I think. I'm sitting here thinking about the systems that we use now and how will they move to this new standard. And I also thought back 4 years ago when MARC was first developed, LC was the leader in developed models, and we showed them basically how to do it right. But now we've moved to be like everybody else, where we use an off-the-shelf system. We may not be able to demonstrate that it's right until we have a system that can demonstrate it. And you said we do have some prototypes. So I'm wondering, how will we be able to encourage people to move in this direction when products that don't work with it exist yet? And the second part of that question is, what is the buy-in going to be from the system vendors that are now so, their whole market is based on MARC, and get them to retool and come up with this new generation of systems is going to be expensive for them. So I'm wondering, how are we going to get there? You touched upon that already.
Well, right, and it could be very slow. It depends on several factors. It could be something that'll be very slow because, as you say, they each have to retool, and then a library that uses those tools has to be able to afford to get a replacement tool, and whether it's the catalog or whether it's just a little tool. So it depends on several things as to how fast we can do it. Sometimes in technology, you know, if you think about, if you can even remember now, pre-web, that something, it may take a little while, a while in the background as it's developing, but all of a sudden it explodes because it offers so many opportunities that many people come and grab at it. Well, you know, we're not a community that has a whole lot of money and a whole lot of people trying to innovate for us, so we're not going to explode. But it could be that at some point, things will really pick up with respect to an evolution to a new environment. But that's to be seen.
And that's one of the reasons we want to have some vendors among the groups that we talk to too, because they will do it because it's a business proposition. If we are moving from MARC, they will move because that's going to be their business. They have to help us, tell us how they can do that and what the impact is of what we're planning.
And they have to be able to see that they can offer a service or something new in their product because they have moved partially or wholly to this new environment that will help them sell. And that's what one would hope that would be the case, that they will innovate and they will use the new capabilities that the new environment would offer to have a product that's different from what we have now and has more features in it.
Can I ask one other thing? LC played a really leadership role before. Do you think LC will be one of the early implementers of a new style system in this case? Maybe it's more question for you.
I don't know. Clearly, we'd have to worry about that, which is one of the reasons, obviously, that we have Ann Della Porta as the head of ILS office as a part of the group, because she needs to help us stay informed of what the shift is likely to mean. Clearly, she and her office are always thinking about what the future iteration of the system we currently have is. Do we continue? Do we get another enhanced version of that, or do we think about something different? Do we work with the current vendor that we have to talk about what this might lead to, and can that vendor and its leaders help us as we shift? Certainly, Ex Libris, for instance, has some of the key players and thinkers on their staff, and we've already identified one or two of them as part of this technical group or technical groups that we're looking at. So it's pulling in all of these right players to stimulate our thinking and to make sure we don't go too far afield without having the reality of what it means to implement. So I don't know the answer. I know that we're looking at what we evolved to. Even before we were thinking seriously about exploring moving from MARC, we were thinking about what the next generation of our system is going to look like. Would it be off the shelf? Would it be something else, or be some sort of amalgamation? So I don't think we can give you a solid answer, except we know it will shift, and whether we will have the first new system in place, I think remains to be seen. I think it's really too early to say. Bob first, and then.
Mine may be a little bit more focused question, but follow up to Randy's. We have assurances from the library and funders that we could undertake a major new initiative that possibly could lead to a new ILS within, say, 5 years or more.
Are you asking that as a specific question?
Yeah.
No, we don't have a concrete statement from our appropriators that yes, we may do this. But when we moved to Voyager and actually implement our first ILS, we came up with a plan first of what it is we wanted and what we thought the advantages, the pros and cons, and we presented that. So if we get to that stage, we would then need to think about, can that be accomplished with the budget that we already have as our base, or will we have to go forward and ask for a funding for a new initiative? And if so, we need to lay out, can you imagine laying out in lay terms what we've been trying to talk to you about, who catalog and understand where we are and where we might want to go? So we'd have to make that kind of proposal if that's what we ended up doing. And I can't say at this point we will or will not. It may be we just build on whatever we have as the base of ILS as determining what the new system is. So there are a lot of unknowns with that. Gail and then Mira. I think Gail's hand came up.
I'm really intrigued by that justification in layperson's terms, because how will you be able to, and that's related to what I wanted to ask you. Being on the IT side, how will we know we got it right? You've laid out some high-level objectives that must be met. I'm curious about objectives from the end-user perspective. So who might you be involving in the discussion to set up some, we must, once we put something in place, we must still be able to do all of these things we can do now. And then what are those things from in layperson's terms, from the end user perspective, do we expect to be able to do in addition, taking advantage of these new opportunities?
Now, Ann
Are there
Delaporte,
people inside the library you're working with or outside who've already done such things, and what are your plans?
well, before we answer, Ann Delaporte has stood since we've been invoking the name of Ann and ILS Program Office. So I'll let her weigh in first, and then we will.
Well, it's not, this isn't IT from the perspective of developing formats that will then be used for whatever system.
Well, I think part of what Sally was saying in her in-depth walking through the standards was that we have to maintain ongoing operations as we evolve.
Sure.
So no matter what we do, we aren't going to shut down our operation. That's why we want to plant the seed today for the first time that we've talked to the LC staff, that this is what we're looking at. It's going to be evolutionary. It's going to take years to see, to get from, if we call this point A to, I won't even say point Z, but just maybe point G along the spectrum. So we have to maintain all that we're doing and innovate at the same time. And that's wherein lies the difficulty that we'll face. But yes, all these ongoing operations have to be sustained. We have to continue to get out cataloging data. We have to have systems that support us as we move to that. And we have to have something that tests these pilots and these prototypes or whatever they end up being. And
Sorry to interrupt you, Chair, but since
no, I think you are key players. Enlighten us.
People asked about systems, and I wanted everyone to know that Roberta has tasked the ILS office with coming up with a plan over the next couple of months for getting LC to its next generation ILS. And right now, I have no idea what that will be. Certainly, many of the traditional ILS vendors are developing their next generation ILSs, and the Bibliographic Framework Initiative does intend to involve ILS vendors as well as service vendors in this initiative. So while LC is looking at the Bibliographic Framework Initiative going forward over the next 4 or 5 years, LC will also be looking at what the options are for migrating to its next generation system. Part of that obviously will involve going out to all stakeholders of the library and also stakeholders external to the library in gathering requirements for our next generation system, and that would be part of the plan. So Gail, we would be talking to Copyright Office about that. In talking to some of the vendors about what they're developing now, they are developing in XML. Ex Libris happens to be developing their next generation ILS system on an Oracle platform, but nevertheless, it's still XML. I would say over the next 6 months, we'll probably have a better idea of where LC itself is going. But my personal opinion is that the Bibliographic Framework Initiative and LC's migration will proceed in parallel, and both will inform each other.
Particularly the last few words, inform each other. Let's see, Nearest.
Well, I was just going to ask, how is this going to impact acquisitions and what about the OPAS? Will there be any need for OPAS?
Well, there'll always be some need for the front end and for the user interface.
You have to run the OPAS.
Exactly. You answered your own question. Other questions? Helena?
Good morning, everyone. I'm looking forward to the future, but it's great to hear some of the past honored today as well. And part of that past special collections, we started to talk about the music division is taking a leadership role here. How many of the bibliographic descriptions are still on that really old format, the 3x5-inch card? And so I wanted to take the chance today to mention that it's on the order of 500,000 to 750,000 entries. And I think we've lit a hot hustle under us today to get that work done while there's still a traditional MARC container. But letting Andy know too, we hope we'll be pumping a lot into the catalog, and then
I'm surprised at the
environment.
I'm surprised at the numbers that small. Is that
Yeah, me
that
too.
We
encompasses?
have forgotten to include the motion picture digitally sometimes.
Yeah, I thought that
larger numbers.
the number would be
About
much
250,000
greater.
P&P. I believe it's 500,000 in music, is anyone here?
90 million.
And then it's half the rare book edition.
That's okay. So I thought you were talking about the entire group of cross collection services. You were just talking about within P&P.
Within P&P, we have about 250,000.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
You're
So
right, it could grow to 1 million.
so I think it's a much larger number than just that. If we want to look at all of them in the special formats areas, and we do need to worry about that as well.
Thank you.
So that just shows you all the pieces that have to be worried about even as we move forward. But we've been told, even if in these constrained budgetary times, we cannot stop innovating and thinking about a better future. So we have to figure out a way to do that and still be reminded of all the pieces that need to go on as we make the shift. Are there any other thoughts, concerns, or contributions such as Helena and Ann made? If not, Randy?
I wanted to throw into Ann's mix the fact that for the non Roman cataloging, that even though MARC pulled in the Roman parts of those old printed cards, there's still a lot of non-Roman data that was never converted. Particularly for Russian, I think it was 400,000. For Chinese, I'm sure there's probably more of that than that. So if at some point that needs to be considered, we still have a lot of data that we haven't gotten to MARC. Not that it has to turn into MARC first. It can go into whatever the new system.
And it may be, depending on where we are, that you just have to make a management decision that you'll skip this particular stage and leap to the next one when the next one presents itself. And how critical is that in relationship to managing the incoming information and materials that we're getting, even as we think about the other pieces. Okay. If there's nothing else, we thank you for your time and attention, and stay tuned.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.